Let's shift things into perspective. We're going to imagine it's the year 2046 and you're finally at home, enjoying the peace of quiet as you sink into your most comfortable chair. The house is so silent, it reminds you of how alone you are, but for a long time, you told yourself that you preferred it that way. You try and think back to the last time you saw a friend, and you can't really remember whether it was the year before last. You let out a big yawn and you open TikTok and scroll for a couple of minutes just to relax because your mind needs to relax, but your mind isn't letting you relax. There's so many different thoughts all at once. And the one thought that keeps replaying in your mind is, why do I feel so alone? First time I did this experiment, I was trying to live through the eyes of the people in my family. Their lives had become a routine and they were a shell of their former selves. I wanted to see what my life could look like if I didn't deal with my demons. I was so terrified at this idea. It was scary to me because this is exactly what avoidance looked like. And avoidance looks like living your life passively. What I found myself thinking was, I need to pay more attention to the things that I've been avoiding. There's a quote that says, if you're silent about your pain, they'll kill you and say you enjoyed it. And that was by the great Zora Neale Hurston. To be honest, that realization had me so shook, and ever since So I recently went back to visit my parents, and it was there that I really got to slow down and really think about my past and also think about my future, where I wanted to go. And I realized through the way in which my family communicated with each other that I also had a communication problem, and that was stopping me from growing in a lot of ways. Me having a problem with struggling to speak up about how I feel meant that I was a very passive aggressive person, because even if you don't actually vocalize it, there are different ways in which your body language or like your energy or vocalize what it is that you're not talking about. An example of this would be like when I was with my ex, if he would do something that would piss me off, I wouldn't even address it. I would just block him. And looking back, that's just not normal and that's just not healthy. And it's a very terrible way of dealing with things. But if I felt overwhelmed and he was just not getting it, I'm blocking him. Like, I don't want to talk to you right now. And what's so interesting about the mind is that was something that I did when I was a child to, I guess, feel safe or keep myself safe. But even now as an adult, I was still doing those same behaviors despite no longer being in that environment where I felt like I had to do those things to be safe. And this is why it's so important to deal with your demons, because even though you feel like it's not that serious, this is not something that is going to affect me, I'm going to be different from my parents, if you don't deal with it, it will deal with you in different ways and it will show up in different ways to where you snowball so much that you become exactly like the person in which you said that you would never become like. I still struggle to communicate because of this very thing, and I find that when something is not going right, I just tend to avoid it because I don't really know what to do other than avoid it. We all know the saying, hurt people, and this is one of the realest quotes that I've ever heard. And if you don't know already, I'm someone that is big on cliche quotes. When I go through things in life, I'm like, oh, that's why that quote says that. That quote simply means people who have unresolved traumas, emotional pain, or insecurity tend to inflict that same pain onto other people instead of dealing with it themselves. If you're watching Widow's Bay on Apple TV, a perfect example of hurt people would be the relationship between the main character Tom and his son Evan. Tom's biggest fear is losing his son because he lives on an island where essentially you can't leave unless it's in a body bag. But Tom hasn't told his son Evan this. But instead of communicating his fears with his son, Tom, who's also the mayor, tries to attract people onto the island to make it seem more desirable so that his son would never want to leave, essentially. I've seen this dynamic play out in my own life as well. When life got too hard, I would isolate because it felt easier to deal with things by myself. Sometimes I'd even feel like I don't even know what's going on with me, or sometimes I feel like it's not that important. They probably wouldn't want to be burdened with my problems anyways. And so I would just isolate and cut people off instead of reaching out and building a connection with them, which is what I desperately wanted. Just like the saying, good things take time. Healing your trauma is also a huge process in itself. Since I've been learning to unpack and I guess just deal with my demons, I've realized how much time, effort, and commitment is actually required to deal with this. It's quite easy to see when someone hasn't also taken that time out for themselves to deal with their traumas. Since the sun has been out recently in the UK, I've been making it my mission to make sure I go on walks, and it has done me so good. I feel so snatched. I feel so like relaxed as well. My body moves a lot more differently. But anyways, whilst on these walks, I realized you can only meet a version of someone based on how much they've met themselves. Being self-aware and choosing to bear your wounds, choosing to deal with your demons is a choice, and not everyone is bold enough to make that decision, and not everyone feels as though they need to make that decision for themselves as well. And I'm learning how to not hold resentment, because people can only treat you how they know how to treat themselves. There's been a few ways that I've tried to heal, and one of them was revisiting memories that I would try to dismiss. Do you guys ever get those flashbacks where you can't even think about it too long because you get so pissed off, like you get so heated, it's like, why did that even happen? And then you just brush it because it's so many emotions that come up in that moment that you don't even want to deal with. But I started to sit and really think back to those memories that I would dismiss, and it allowed me to validate my younger self in that moment, and it allowed me to offer my younger self something that I wouldn't have been given at that time. So maybe it was like protection or comfort or just being understood in that moment. And in those moments, I would often release. That would look like crying, or it would look like just being filled with so much emotion. One of my favorite things to now do is cry. Like, I love to cry because I feel like it's such a healthy way to release what you're feeling. And then after the emotions would settle, that's when it would allow me to see the situation a lot more clearly. Releasing or acknowledging the situation doesn't change what happens. It just changes your relationship to what had happened. And it was in these moments that it helped me do things like forgive my parents. It helped me no longer hold this resentment that I had towards them. Something that I'd realized on my hot girl walk was I need to regulate myself way more often than I do at the moment. There are so many other ways trauma shows up. It's not always in these big emotional reactions. Sometimes it's in the little things. And I'm going to give you guys an example that is kind of embarrassing, but I want you to stay with me. But it actually gives me so much anxiety to do things like send messages, but that's a sign that you are stressed. That's a sign that you are overwhelmed, and that is then cue for you to regulate yourself in that moment. And this is just a reminder to you who is watching that there is no way out of dealing with your trauma except going through it, except sitting in that storm. It's those hard moments where you learn something about yourself or understand something with a bit more clarity. And even if you don't gain that clarity, it allows you to give yourself something that was missing in that moment. You have to be aware enough to catch it in your everyday, but brave enough to decide to do things differently. I'm Brunel. Thank you for watching. You can subscribe to this channel, subscribe to my Substack. I will definitely see you guys in my next one.